Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome to the SBI Podcast, a weekly broadcast dedicated to helping you make your number by getting your peers to share with you how they are making theirs. Today we're going to demonstrate how to determine which markets to compete in and which markets to avoid. So why this topic? So many executive teams tend to focus most of their attention on gaining share in their existing markets. And while it is necessary to maintain and sometimes increase market share, changing your company's exposure to growing and shrinking market segments should be a major focus. My name is Greg Alexander. I'm the CEO of SBI, and I'm your host for today. And helping me today with our demonstration is an executive who knows a thing or two about this topic. His name is Jim Briles. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hello, Greg. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with you today.
And Jim, if you wouldn't mind, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, my name is Jim Briles. I am the Chief Operating Officer of American Global Logistics based in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, and what does American Global Logistics do for a living?
So AGL is a NVOCC, which is a non-vessel operating common carrier. Basically, we manage the supply chain for our customers who primarily import ocean freight from Asia into the United States.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the questions. So my first question for you, Jim, is how did you determine the sweet spot of your addressable market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, honestly, a lot of it was just trial and error. We made a lot of mistakes early on in our days. Ultimately, it came down to really determining where we were making money and where we weren't, and just adjusting accordingly. Over time, it was easy to see where we should focus our attention and more importantly, where we should not.
Okay. And when you say where we were making money, is was there a financial analysis that was done behind that, or was it kind of more tribal knowledge that said, hey, it seems like this is where we're winning and this is where we're losing?
No, I think early on we sort of used our internal knowledge, but when we did a deep dive with more of a financial focus is where we saw that typically most of our bigger customers, we had the better returns on each of them. So we really started to focus on going after large customers, high volume shippers, where again the return was much higher than our smaller or lower volume customers.
Okay, very good. And then were there any markets that you deliberately avoided, and if so, how come?
Yeah, so again, most of our customers are shipping ocean freight containers from Asia to the U.S., and so the first thing that we looked at was looking at high volume versus low volume. So if you're shipping 1 container a month versus 100 containers a month, what we found were the high volume shippers, the ones doing 100 containers a month, were a lot more profitable for us, and honestly a lot easier to work with on the operations side. Additionally, it really depended on what they were shipping. So if they were shipping a lower value product, let's say finished furniture, versus a higher value product, let's say wearing apparel, it really made a difference in how they viewed the partnership. So we really have focused on high volume and high value customers.
Okay. I would imagine these high volume shippers that ship high quality and high value products, all of your competitors are going after that same space because it sounds like that's where the profit pool is. So how do you compete in that space?
So great question. Those are the customers that we have found are very hard to get into. So we do operate in a very crowded space, and our competitors are calling our customers all the time. What we found were, again, these high volume, high value shippers aren't the ones that are likely to change every day. They don't approach what we do as a transactional relationship. They really approach it from a relationship based. So even if they're getting solicited on a daily basis, which probably a lot of them are, they're not apt to change very quickly. We ingrain ourselves within our customers. We have IT solutions. We put people in-house. We're really a part of their team. Again, if you look at the low volume, low value shippers, they approach it from a more transactional based approach. So it's much easier to lose those accounts, which again is not what we want.
Yep. At some point, you had to win that high quality account. And as you mentioned, they don't often switch. So how did you get them to switch to you?
So the way we approach it is we take a very, very long approach. Our sales cycle could be 18 to 24 months. And really it just starts with a simple phone call, a warm lead if you have it. But really it's ultimately becoming a resource and an expert for that customer. If the customer has a question and they call you first, you're in a pretty good spot. When we call a customer and they want rates on day one, it's probably not a good fit for us. So what we like to do is really take a very slow, methodical approach. We don't want a customer that's going to switch overnight. If they switch to us today, they'll switch away from us tomorrow. So what we do is really ingrain ourselves with what they're doing. We become a resource for them. We become an expert for them. And quite honestly, you wait for something to happen with their current provider. So we just want to be there. We want to be their go-to resource. And when the time's right, it usually works out for us.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we're talking to Jim Briles about how to determine which markets to compete in and which ones to avoid. And that concludes our first segment. So we're going to take a quick break. During the break, I want you to think about these three questions I asked Jim. Do you know the answers? And do you like your answers? If not, I think we can help you. Consider having one of our experts spend some time with you in a workshop. And to get a feel for what is covered in the workshop, go to sbi.tips/2017 workbook and download a copy of the workbook that we use in these sessions. And if you're watching the video broadcast, I'm holding this workbook up in front of me right now. As you can see, this thing is a beast. It's a little over 400 pages, believe it or not, with dozens and dozens of exercises designed specifically to help you think through big issues like this. Which markets should I be in? Which ones should I avoid? Which competitors should I go after? And when I do go after those competitors, what is my competitive strategy? Et cetera, okay? So that's what's covered in the workshop. I encourage you all to go download a copy of that report and reach out to one of our team members. All right, this is the SBI Podcast. We'll be back in a bit.
Meet Jake, the VP of Sales for a growing tech company and an avid runner. During his marathon training, he listens to SBI podcasts.
Dedicated to helping you make your number.
This way, he can stay in shape and stay on top of the emerging best practices in sales and marketing.
Your job as a sales ops team is to make the sales team more efficient.
Now that he's mastered the 8-minute mile, he's planning to make his number and take over the top sales spot in the tech world. So watch out, competition. Jake is right behind you.
Help the audience understand how you prioritize those accounts.
And he just got his second win. How do you SBI? Podcast, video podcast, blog, TV, magazine. Access it all on the new SBI app, available now in iTunes.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the SBI Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Alexander, and today's guest is Jim Briles, Chief Operating Officer from AGL, American Global Logistics. Today, we are demonstrating how to determine which markets to compete in and which ones to avoid. So let's jump back into our questions. So, Jim, when you think about demand in your industry, what are the demand drivers in your target market, and how did you learn about them?
Yeah, there's really two main drivers. It's price and service, which is probably similar to most service-based industries. Ultimately, can I do what I told you I can do, and can I do it for a market competitive price?
Mm-hmm. And when you think about demand drivers, maybe kind of further up the value chain from that, for example, you guys are focused on shipping containers via ocean freight. Coming in from Asia as an example. So does the trade agreements or the global trade volume between continent to continent, does that drive demand in your industry? Or is it a space where there's just so much demand that you really don't have to worry about this?
Yeah, it's such a huge industry. I believe there was about 20 million containers imported into the U.S. last year. AGL, as one of the top 10 largest NVOCCs out there, we're probably 0.001% of that. So the market is a massive market.
Okay, got it. All right, so in a scenario like that, you probably, for the audience members, since this is a learning call, you probably don't need to think about demand drivers as much. However, if you're not in an industry like that, this concept of a demand driver is something you really want to pay attention to, because it will help you select markets, which markets to compete in, which ones to avoid. For example, right now, I have my glasses on. Why am I wearing glasses? Well, I'm 46 years old, my eyes are failing me, and I look at monitors all day long. So if you're a manufacturer of monitors, making bigger monitors, making high definition monitors, you're in a good spot, because we have an aging population in the United States. And as people get older, their eyes fail, and I might have a need now for a new monitor. That's an example of a demand driver. So really ask yourself the question, what are my demand drivers? And does that help me narrow my market segments and help me choose which markets to compete in and which ones aren't? Because obviously you want to compete in the markets with strong, healthy demand drivers that have a lot left in their life cycle. Okay, let's move on to the next question. And this is takes a little bit of a setup, and it's a three-part question. So generally speaking, there are three types of growth strategies. Let me explain. So the first one is what's known as market expansion. And in this area, growth is going to come from your current market expanding rapidly. The second type of growth strategy is called market exposure. And in this space, your growth is going to come from exposing your company to a new market. And the third type of growth strategy is called market share. And it is what it sounds like. And here, growth is going to come from taking share from competitors. So recap: market expansion, market exposure, and market share. And depending on which of these three you choose, if it's one or if it's more than one, which one is primary, which one is secondary, etc., this is a key input into choosing which markets to compete in and which markets to avoid. So Jim, as it relates to AGL and your business, is your growth strategy based on one of those, all three of those? What's your commentary on that concept?
Sure. So ours is really a hybrid. The primary is market share. As I just mentioned, our market is so large and vast. If we do nothing else but go after market share, we can grow exponentially. But really, it's a hybrid of growing the market share, but also market exposure. So in the past, we definitely went after some of the lower value commodity shippers. And as we look to grow and we're focused on the higher value commodity shippers, it's a whole new market for us. So this is going from a basic commodity of furniture and tires into electronics and garments. So the market share will still always be the focus, but going into a new market and the exposure to a new market is how we think we'll grow and what our plan is to grow.
Okay, very good. You know, and if you think about Jim's answer there, so he's got a dual-pronged growth strategy. His core business is market share gain, so he's going to beat the bad guys. And his another part of his growth business is he's exposing himself to new markets, you know, for the first time, and that's going to be a source of growth. If you pull that all the way through sales execution as an example, the types of salespeople that you need in those two different growth strategies are very different. In a market share situation, the type of salespeople that you need there are those that can get into a street fight and that can beat the bad guys, you know. And there you might have things like a very strong sales methodology to increase win rates. You might have a really tight win-loss review process after every deal. You might have a deal desk where all the big deals have to come through a deal desk to be inspected to make sure that we win our fair share of those deals. Those are types of things that might happen in a market share environment. In a market exposure environment, it's a very different type of sale. There, you need a sales team that can evangelize on your behalf. You know, they're calling people for the first time who might not even know who you are. and they have to educate these new buyers about your company, your product offering, your price, your service, what you might be able to do for them. Very different type of salesperson. So if you're somebody like Jim and you hold a senior executive position like CEO or COO, and you're selecting these growth strategies, be sure to connect that to your sales strategy, because it will have a big implication kind of downstream, if you will. Okay, let's take another break. Before you come back, head over to Apple's App Store and download the SBI app. This allows you to get all of SBI sales and marketing content like this show in a mobile-friendly way. So one more segment with Jim after the break. We'll be back in a second.
Meet Tom. He's the CEO of a leading medical device company, and this is his business partner, the latest SBI workbook. Every day, Tom uses the workbook to guide his sales and marketing vision. The yellow sticky? That's his corporate strategy. The pink sticky? His product roadmap. The dog-eared section? That's where Tom's mapped out next year's growth plan. The stain on the cover? That's from the champagne he popped open when they made their Q4 number.
That was a good day, wasn't it, Mr. Workbook?
How do you SBI? Take it to the next level with the SBI Workbook. Order your copy today at howdoyousbi.com.
Okay, this is our last segment with Jim, demonstrating how to determine which markets to compete in and which ones to avoid. Let's try and summarize what we learned today by giving the audience an action plan. So Jim, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you were to advise the audience on 3 things to do right now to determine which markets to compete in and which ones to avoid, what would they be?
Greg, that's a great question. We actually just went through an internal strategic plan over the last few months. So some of the things that we looked at was first and foremost, we looked at our current base of business. We looked where we were making money, where we were not, and what were the drivers of that. So I would say my first step is just evaluating where you are right now. The second thing is we identified where we wanted to be. So I'm not saying a pie in the sky, projection, but a realistic 5-year goal of where we wanted our company to be. And the last step was we really created concrete customer targets and a concrete sales plan and organization to get us to that 5-year goal. Is really about going after, acquiring, and successfully onboarding the right accounts. So those will be my 3 steps, which is, again, look at your current base of business, identify where you want to be, and create a concrete action plan to get there.
Yeah, very good advice, fantastic. And particularly in that concrete plan, you've got customer targets, and you built a sales plan and an organizational chart to go after it. So love the actioning of the 5-year strategic plan, which is great. So Jim, that was a great demonstration. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show.
Okay, great. And I want to thank the SBI audience for tuning in. Last quarter, this show hit another milestone. The average first-time listener of the show listens to 4 episodes inside of the first week of subscribing. This tells us that the shows are valuable to the audience. As long as that holds true, we're going to continue to produce them. So thank you for your continued support. And if you're a first-time listener, be sure to check out the complete library of the shows. We're up over 100 at this point. If you want to learn more about this topic or the other areas we focus on, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/register and create an account. This will allow you to personalize your experience with our content. For instance, you can choose the topics you're interested in and how often you want to learn about them. Okay, that's it for today. As always, until next time, I wish you good luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.